Any questions? So without further ado, whoopsies, I'm going too fast. There we go. Designing a kanji curriculum using radicals. So
Yes.
take it over, Rebecca.
All right. So, like many of us, kanji is a core part of the curriculum, but it's also um, a very labor intensive part of the curriculum that just doesn't exist for our colleagues who teach other languages. So as a high school teacher, I have been kind of on my own as far as trying to figure out how to approach this. So I started about 10 years ago looking at the kanji curriculum or the curricula that I had available to me, and considering what the goals of the curricula I have access to were, and whether those goals lined up well with my goals. So, in my case, my students are high school students. They're high school students in the United States. They are students who have at most 5 years of formal classes in the American school system. Um, they are likely to be studying this in an environment where their primary exposure to Japanese is in school. So these pieces of information are really necessary to consider when you're looking at your overall kanji curriculum. So I started looking at these different curricula that I had available to me. First thing that I had really available to me, because my district purchased textbooks, is the curriculum that's integrated as part of Adventures in Japanese. So, Adventures in Japanese is a well established textbook series that is aimed at high school students, and it is really aimed at high school students in a 4-year sequence. But then, if you look a little bit further at the context of it, this was a textbook series that was developed in a very specific high school environment. This was developed at the Punahou School in Honolulu, which is a really prestigious college preparatory private school. This is where President Obama was a student. This is like high level. Everybody there isn't just planning on going to college, they're planning on going to capital C college. They're planning on going Ivy League. They're competitive. So, some of the things that are specific to the environment where that textbook was developed would be things like Japanese Hawaiian history that's incorporated in the textbook. So, it's not really relevant to my students. Some of the things in that textbook are relevant to the specific teachers in that program, but not particularly to me. So, that type of information there. Then I was also taking a look at some really good quality college level textbooks that are available to us in the US as well. And so I know, Yokoso and Genki are very commonly used with both adult and high school learners in the United States. Yokoso and Genki, these are really specifically written with an adult or college learner in mind, but they are written with the audience of an American learner in a university or adult life setting as the context. So there are things in that context that didn't really relate as tightly to my students as you might want. But overall, they're very thoughtfully developed curricula. So I was like, okay, so these are really good textbooks. These are good resources, but I feel like there's some key ways in which they don't relate to my students. So I started looking at some other resources. So I went from there and started looking at the kanji curricula that are established by Monbu Kagakusho for native speakers in Japan. And then when you look at that, I looked at Ichinensei through Yonensei elementary school to look at that. And I looked at these and considered the context there. You're looking at native speakers who are quite young, who are speaking Japanese in their daily lives in addition to learning it at school. So that's a little different. And for these native speakers, you're looking at a context where the expectation is that these 4 years are laying a groundwork for a lifelong continuation of using and learning more kanji. So some of the things that you see in those kanji lists there really clearly illustrate things that are part of the life of a young native speaker that would be not familiar or just not relevant for a high school age American student. So then, because I haven't analyzed enough things yet, yes, I love Happy Lilac. There are fantastic resources there for native speakers. That website is developed specifically for parents to support their kids. So I believe if you look into the content there, some of it says, please don't use this other than with your family kind of comments. I noticed that after using it with my students some. So like, okay, crud. But Happy Lilac, even if you look at it and realize, okay, I can't ethically use this as is, it has a lot of great ideas. I think I'm thinking of the right one having that. There's happylilac.net has a lot of those. And let me pull up a different one. Print Kids is another one that has a lot of really excellent. Oh, it was Print Kids that I'm thinking of that has that. Please don't use it other than with your kids at home. But both of these here. Let me share that to the everybody chat line. This one right here has a lot of good resources that are specific to the Monbu Kagakusho curriculum. So looking at those kanji curricula, it's like, okay, there are specific ways that these don't relate to my audience. So then I looked at the IB curriculum. So the International Baccalaureate Program. This is aimed at high school level learners who are learning Japanese as a second language. And for IB curriculum, it is a 2-year sequence that is intended to be the end of either 4 or 5 total years of learning that language. And the IB curriculum is intended to definitely be preparing a student for college level coursework. And of course, because we're Americans, I had to look at the AP published kanji list. The IB list, because the audience is not specifically American, there are some things in there that I see that feel almost irrelevant to me, honestly. I look at the IB suggested grammar and the IB kanji list, and one of the specific features of the IB exams is that the instructions are always entirely in the target language. So students need to learn kanji that are relevant to common instructions on that exam. But I'm not teaching an IB course. So the last thing I looked at, of course, the AP exam published list. This is 410 kanji. This one is definitely aimed at American high school students. And for the AP exam, the instructions are in English. So there aren't kanji necessary to the list that would be specific to instructions. So I came up with so much here. This is where spreadsheets become your friend pretty fast. Okay, so as you're looking at this, I've got my AP exam kanji list, the Monbu Kagakusho lists here. The IB curriculum lists, these ones are ab initio would be a 2-year sequence of students who hadn't yet started studying the language. So it's 2-year intensive beginner. The SL means standard level. SL would be students who are doing a 2-year sequence that is following probably 2 or 3 years of already learning the language. HL is high level, so it's the standard level plus some additional stuff. So I gathered all of these kanji lists and did some massive analysis on it. Yes. Okay. I kind of like this though, honestly, I do. So I did some massive analysis on this and did some figuring out if a character is showing up on multiple lists. And my take on it was, hey, these lists, if a character is showing up on all 3 of these types of lists, then pretty inarguably, I should include this in my curriculum, because all of these different educational organizations have decided that this is a useful character. So that's what's indicated in this column to the left. It's showing up in how many of these types of lists. So I ended up with a list of, oh my goodness, how many of these characters that showed up in all 3 types of lists. There we go. 364. So 362 characters that were showing up in all 3 types of lists. So when I looked at that, I was like, okay, inarguably, these definitely should be part of my curriculum, because I can't assume that I'm smarter than all of these people. Yes, these definitely need to be in all 3 lists in my curriculum. So then after that, looking at these kanji that show up in 2 of the lists, I needed to look and see, okay, why are they showing up, where they're showing up, which 2 lists are they showing up in? Do they seem like they'd be useful to me? Because if it is showing up, like you can see here, this is showing up for native speakers who are in 4th grade and showing up for high level IB students. Let me think carefully about high frequency vocabulary where those would show up, and consider whether those are going to be really useful for my high school age American learners. So I did that analysis, and then when it came down to the kind of the bottom here and said, okay, if it's only showing up in 1 list, how useful is it to me? And after having done all of that type of analysis, I did the numbers. So the AP, the advanced placement, and the IB standard level lists had 339 characters in common with each other. There were 362 characters that showed up in all 3 types of lists. The AP and the high level list had an additional 48 characters in common. And then I came down and said, okay, AP list and the native speakers lists, what do they have in common? So I did this kind of analysis and then thought carefully about, if I am looking at how many characters I think are reasonable to introduce to my students at the high school level, how many total does that look like? We talked before about me teaching hiragana and katakana during Japanese 1, and then after that, about how many characters do I think realistically I could pace without being overwhelming. And this is what I came up with for levels 1 and 2, about 15 new characters per topic. And for levels 3 and higher, about 20 new characters per topic. So then this brings us to the question, not of what, but of how. Because this is the part where I typically really disagree respectfully with a lot of the textbooks that I see. The how. When you look at a lot of Japanese textbooks and you look at the way that the kanji are grouped, often what you see is kanji that are grouped by a subject rather than by features of the characters themselves. And this, I feel, doesn't take advantage of the language skills that our students already have when they arrive in our classrooms. If you look at resources that are aimed at non-native speakers who want to learn kanji as an independent activity, students who want to work to learn Japanese as adults on their own, you see resources like Joyo Kanji. And if you're not familiar with Joyo Kanji, this one is organized around the idea of learning the pieces of the kanji and learning what the radicals actually mean. This is not something I was taught as an early learner of Japanese. I was not taught what a lot of the radicals mean. I was just taught this is a piece of information. One of the first words that I learned to write in kanji in Japanese 1, first semester, I learned to write benkyo in kanji. Why? How useful is that? I didn't learn what any of the components in those two characters were. It wasn't introduced to me. So instead of learning that these are pieces put together, similar to phonic chunks in an English word, I learned, well, crap, I guess you have to learn 25 lines every time. And that's overwhelming. No wonder students perceive this as an overwhelming chunk of information if that's the way that it is presented to them. So if you were to look at Joyo Kanji, or if you were to look at Wani Kani, that's another one that you may have heard of. Wani Kani is another self-study item that is based on starting with radicals, learning what radicals mean, and then putting them together. Wani Kani, they tend to have their own meaning for some of these radicals. So I don't like this one as much as I do Joyo Kanji. But these types of resources that are making kanji learning manageable for self-studying adults, this is my starting point with how to organize these. Yes. So coming back to my masterful analysis of what, I gotta show you something. This may take a minute. There we go. So you see this? After figuring out the what I wanted to teach them, I started to go through and analyze what radicals were showing up in the kanji that I had decided were going to definitely be in my curriculum. And I realize when you look at this later in greater detail, you'll realize, I think, that some of my divisions here are not what a dictionary would necessarily say the pieces are within a character. But if you look at jisho.org, what you'll see is a similar type of a breakdown where it'll show you the radicals and then parts that look like they're part of a kanji, even if according to a traditional dictionary, they aren't technically the correct underlying meaning. So like jisho would group together things that have tsuki related to time and nikuzuki. It would group those together, or it would give that as an option. So my analysis, I did that as well because I'm trying to give students a lot of information to hang these newly acquired characters on. So I did a ridiculous amount of analysis breaking these down. And then I came in here and decided how to group the characters that I decided to teach them based on common components. The Kanji Alive thing, I'll show you that in a second. So teaching them based on common components, it shows up less in level 1 because in level 1, I have like, let's teach them numbers up through 10. But then when you get down into upper levels, teaching them based on common components is incredibly useful. So, for example, let me get into, now I want to do year B, unit 3. Sorry. I realized that by scrolling this fast, I'm causing people some problems. Okay. So, for example, year 3, unit 2, I decided to group together several characters that use kusa kanmuri. Okay. So we had kusa, we had the wakai, we had kurushi, we had a bunch of different things that are grouped that way. And as part of introducing characters, we focus a lot on analyzing what we see and breaking it into components, because a student looking at kusa who can look at it and see, okay, I've got that kusa kanmuri, I've got the kanji for day, and I've got the kanji for 10 underneath it, who can look at it as 3 pieces. That student is using the same type of skills that he would use in English when he sees words like unmanageable. Unmanageable are 3 pieces of information. Kusa is 3 pieces of information that got put together. So this is my big analysis on how I put together the sequence. And it is, of course, a work in progress because some of the things that I decided were useful kanji to teach to students are not necessarily showing up in the lists that were indicated by AP and IB. I decided that I also needed to include kanji for grammatical terms, because using the grammatical terms like keiyo doshi and doshi and I used the grammatical terms that Monbu Kagakusho indicated that we should be using to teach Japanese to second language learners. So teaching those terms, I taught the kanji together with them. And then that's been very useful as we're looking at reading content later, because we were able to look at, oh, I closed the tab, pardon me.
Someone also asked if you could make it bigger. I wasn't sure if they were asking about the one that we just looked at or not, but anyway, sorry.
Oh, the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yes, 1 second. On this here, yeah, I can zoom on this. Yeah, perhaps I can zoom. I'm having an issue. There we go, like that.
Hopefully they'll give us a thumbs up.
So, and as you're looking through this, it's a huge amount of information, and I don't mean to suggest that my conclusions that I've reached about how I should organize this, they're not necessarily the right conclusions for everybody. But from my particular audience of high school students in the United States who are planning to take the AP exam after 4 or 5 years, this is what I determined would be helpful for them. So, how this is shaking out. We used this reading text recently during class. And the unit that we are wrapping up for AP is talking about how language is part of your identity. And it's been very interesting. And this article here gets into discussing things like, how does Kansai Ben function? And what, let me make that bigger still. How does Kansai Ben function? And they've been fascinated by this, because even though Kansai Ben is not something in their lives, they know very well that in English, Holgen exist. They speak a couple of them in their daily lives, but they're able then to look at words like hyojingo and break down those characters and make good educated guesses, because every time we look at these types of text, I can say to them now, what do you see in that kanji? What pieces do you see there? All right, because we've studied how kanji are put together, you can look at this kanji and say, I see this piece and this piece. Perhaps it is related to this general topic. And I don't know what your impression of the difficulty level is on this text, but they were able to look at this and do a lot of that type of analysis. This right here, that kanji is not showing up in any AP list, right? I can't remember what that sounds like right now because I'm tired. But I know, and they know, they were able to look at that and say, okay, it looks like it's got the iimasu kanji on the left side, and then the right, it looks like it's got the kagaku no ka on it, right? So it's something about changing language, right? Like, you got it, right? But they are now able to look at mystery kanji in a complex text like this and break them down in the same way that they can look at complex vocabulary in English and make strong educated guesses about them. They're able to look at new complex kanji and come up with hints to help them remember a lot more easily than they could before. A lot of kanji study resources do have hints like this. This is Kanji Alive I showed you a moment ago. It has hints that relate to these radicals that are within the character. But even though these resources are out there, I feel like many of the all-inclusive textbooks that we have don't overtly teach this skill and don't organize the curricula and the sequence in a way that lends itself to teaching this skill. So let's see. I wanted to show you really briefly. Let me see if I can show you how I'm going to reopen a Pear Deck thing and show you briefly how I tend to introduce characters. No, just let me log in. How I tend to introduce groups of characters to my students. I will use I'll use that Kanji Alive web app as something that, here, let me start a live session and then share that link with you so you can see the student side experience of this. In a moment, apparently. Okay, this is not working as quickly as I'd like, but all right. Yeah. I'm going to give you a link in the chat line as soon as it generates it, so you can see how this functions from the student side. There's that link. And just like the previous one, if you click the link and use your Google login, you should be able to see this. This one will look very dramatically different from the student side compared to what I'm able to show through Zoom. Okay. When I'm in class with my students, one of my favorite things is to use a student management tool that we have called Blocksy, and I can actually open this tab on all of my students' computers for them, and I can see what's going on their computers, and it's fantastic. I can just pop open a tab for them, and when I see that they're looking at YouTube instead, I can send them a direct message and say, that's very interesting, but is it connected to what we're doing? Sometimes it is. Okay. All right, I'm going to start showing you the student side of introducing a set of characters to them. So I'll start out by saying, okay, we're going to look at a group of characters that have this component in it. This is called kusa kanmuri. This always shows up at the top. Kanmuri means it's a crown on a character. Those of you who can read and write Chinese, you'll see this also broken into two sides. You might see it look like 10 and 10, or you might see it look like two little tridents in more old-fashioned fonts. But let's look at some characters that have kusa kanmuri. All right, so oh yeah. Kelly, let's hold off on that for a second because we'll see this in a sec. Okay, so when I'm showing them, you can see on the Zoom meeting, this question that you see looks quite different than what you're seeing on the student side there. You've got in the student side a little window of that web app that I showed you before. So we'll talk about the construction of the kanji, and we'll talk about the different fonts that you can see shown in the big window there. If you click on the character, there, you can see the handwriting. If you click to the right, you'll see fonts that are used commonly on the computer or street signs, things like that. If you click to the left, you'll see fonts that are used commonly in restaurant signs, more business signs, again, public signs, but things that are intended to be more artistic. So we'll talk about how they were put together, what are some useful words that use the kanji. And then if the students are working through this as a self-directed assignment on the next slide here, I would ask them to respond with a couple of high frequency words that use the kanji. And we don't need to do that today, but so we'll have the conversation and we'll work through. And now we've got hana, and how is hana constructed? Oh, look, we see we've got katakana i, katakana hi. Oh my goodness, hana are plants that change their shape. Oh, that makes so much sense. And Shiflet Sensei asked, how is it working in terms of retaining and applying these kanji? Because the organizing kanji around the theme of the unit means that they're automatically applicable to the vocabulary that you're working on anyway. And then it seems Shiflet Sensei is saying it seems like these kanji would show up kind of as a standalone concept, and then they would shift words they already knew over to kanji as they learn them. So since students are learning vocabulary prior to learning kanji, there's some of both of those things going on. If you think about organizing a group of new characters around shared radicals, that will lend itself to matching up with the thematic vocabulary of a unit often. And so I grouped the kanji by shared radicals, and I sequenced those groups so that the characters in those groups matched up pretty well with the theme of the unit that I'm working on, so that both really work. So like in this unit, we had high frequency. Okay, we had T, which was not really relevant to the vocabulary there, but it's something that is a very familiar word, and now they can do that. Now they can read it and write it using kanji instead of hiragana. This might not immediately seem like this is relevant to the topic of Holgen, but since we were talking about Holgen, we were talking also about local culture like superstitions. So in Japanese, what are unlucky numbers? This is an unlucky number because it sounds like this kanji. I haven't followed a textbook in a few years. I haven't followed a textbook in a few years. There are some aspects of the grammar sequence that I really did like about Adventures in Japanese, but the vocabulary that was there needed so much adaptation that it was no longer useful as the basis for a course, and my school district wouldn't consider any other textbook series either. And part of that was they were shifting funding over towards reading materials rather than a textbook for all world language courses. So we have a ton of money for classroom libraries at this point. And I'm getting a ton of classroom library materials, but not textbooks. So that's part of that. All right. So, and like I was saying, we've got, this. As soon as they saw this kanji juxtaposed with this kanji, bitterness and youth stuck together for their high school brains very quickly. And suddenly they were writing all about the difficulties and bitternesses of being a high school student. They got a lot of use out of this. Oh my gosh. But like I said to Shiflet Sensei, some of the kanji are going to naturally this way refer back to things that are vocabulary they already knew, and some of it is going to track with vocabulary that's new and thematic to the unit. Let's see, what else? If this format, if showing kanji to students and having them be able to explore the Kanji Alive style app while you're introducing this, either in person or online, if this is useful, I'll also put this in as a template in that folder. All right. I kind of ended up shifting the sequence of how I was going to talk about this topic. So I think I've actually discussed most of what I wanted to talk to you about with this. I don't want to accidentally sound as though I'm criticizing the scholarship of any other people who've written textbooks or developed curricula. It's not my intention at all. My intention was to think really carefully about the context in which I'm teaching and the context in which these other scholars were developing their curricula, and how is their curriculum really appropriate to them, and what aspects of it are appropriate to my students, and what aspects of it would I need to change to really match my students' needs. So I just felt like I needed to say that 7 or 8 times because that's always a hesitation with me when I'm talking about anything that I have planned and the analysis that I've done. I don't ever want to come across as being disparaging of anybody's scholarship. So what are some context considerations that you have to think of that I haven't addressed that you think definitely need to be part of the consideration? For university level, JLPT. Now, for JLPT, are they still publishing suggested kanji lists per level? Because I thought that they'd stepped away from that. I know that there are some websites that are specifically for JLPT prep that kind of gave me the impression that they'd stepped away from publishing specific lists, and JLPT is such a specific kanji emphasis there. Yeah, when I studied for JLPT, there were specific textbooks that had kanji lists there, but I was studying for JLPT in the 1990s, so So the JLPT resources, one of the things that I have emphasized with my students is when you're looking at let me see which one. Oh, it's Kanji link. This guy does a really good job with explaining and this is another person who has organized his curriculum for self-study and kanji around the idea of learning these components and grouping them based on common components. But he has also emphasized that when you're looking at characters, there are different types of characters, and oh no, I skipped ahead. And when you're looking at kanji that have multiple components, a lot of times what you're seeing is something like this with your keisei emoji, where you've got one component that tells you an oni reading and one component that tells you something about the meaning of it. And this particular thing shows up a lot in JLPT. You know how many questions there are on JLPT? They're like, hey, which kanji that sounds like say is the correct one for this context? So I actually feel like grouping characters by common radicals as you're studying them is very helpful to that. All right, so Patty Bruin Sensei asked, can you talk a little bit about classroom resources you have purchased? For example, do you use Tadoku books? Oh, I love Tadoku books. Oh yeah, they're simulated, authentic resources. So I know some people feel differently than I do about it. Some teachers feel like you should only use actually truly authentic resources, but I love them. Tadoku books, if you're not familiar with that, they are something that was developed once this there's an organization in Japan that is Tadoku supporters, Nihongo Tadoku, and they have rated a lot of existing books to see the level of complexity and things like that. But they've also written several new materials that are freely available to educators and learners that are based on that same complexity system. I've put a bunch of these together in a digital bookshelf. Ooh, there's new ones I haven't yet added. I'm so excited. But I love the Tadoku books. I love and yes, the Tadoku books are something that I've been able to have purchased from my classroom library, and I love them. But yeah, tadoku.org, and then there are a few others. So Mikiko Korn Sensei asked, do you create your own kanji practice materials along with these websites based on your list? I do. So one of the other resources that I use a lot for that, this part's very straightforward once you do this. Okay, so renshu.org is one that is free. I can copy that and paste that. Renshu.org. This, you can have a free subscription to this, and you can generate worksheets here if you want to have traceable worksheets. So I, within this, created, based on the Adventures in Japanese series, I put those sets of kanji in. And then I also put in the, let's hide that, let's go back here because it's the one that we were looking at already. created sets within this. And one of the things you can do here is generate practice PDFs to save with the students there. So use that. This is super good for that. Lauren Sensei's face just, she had a big face reaction to that. Yeah, this one's easy to use too. Oh my goodness.
What is this magic?
This magic is so magical. So you can see here, you've got two different options here. You can do the one kanji per page, and you can do the multiple kanji. And renshu.org is like, you don't have to create that dictionary entry. You put in the kanji and it pulls out a dictionary entry for you. So it's nicely organized. So I did that one with the children. What else? What else do I do?
Oh, question, Rebecca, because of Skritter, if you were to get obviously a nice subscription paid for by the school, you could create your own class list of the kanji on Skritter and then just have the students just go and study those.
And again, that's something where I don't have to create the entire entry. I don't have to say this kanji, this onyomi, this kunyomi, these associated vocabulary. In Skritter, I type in the kanji and it pulls an entry for me. I can edit the entry in Skritter if it's not appropriate to what I had in mind, but Skritter allows me to do that, and it also allows me to see how students have progressed within learning those characters. Yeah, I really like Renshu for these things, especially if you have students who prefer printables. These PDFs are nice and they're fast and adaptable to create them. If you have students who having was mentioned a lot earlier in our conversation, having that physical practice, the muscle memory of physically tracing it and writing it. This is great for that. I always make sure to emphasize to my students, I want you to use a stylus, not your finger, if you are tracing to practice these. Let me think, what else do I have them do for kanji business? Man. I have them do a lot of reading where we are looking at these simulated authentic readings or authentic readings. This website that I showed you briefly earlier, this one is a travel magazine called Matcha, and there's the link for the article I'm looking at right now. But you notice in the address line up here, it is JP/number. If you replace that JP with the word easy, many of the articles have this. They have Yasashi Nihongo option on it. So it shows pronunciation on a lot of these, on a lot of the kanji, if the kanji portion of it is overwhelming. Show yours. So that's the most important part of the kanji is absolutely having some good practice of actually using it in context. As you look at this article, the vocabulary that were naturally showing up in this article included a lot of things that were in the kanji list that I was just looking at. We had the eigo no e. We had down here, we had the kanji muzakashi. We had the kotoba no ba. All of those were kanji that were new to that particular unit. So yes, reinforcing them as early as possible with actual usage so it doesn't just fall out of your head. It was very important. Yep. But one second, let me pull my digital bookshelf as well, because that, one second. The pretend bookshelves are pretty fun. Students like these a lot. You can see if you look at these. This is something we could collaborate on here as well, because I've got this set. So Patty Bruin Sensei says, can you compare matcha and NHK News Web Easy? And do you prefer one over the other? There's the link for my bookshelf. So there's that. On the bookshelf, there are several things in here that are YouTube videos of somebody reading a book while the text is scrolling. And I've also linked in here on the second slide of it. Oh, one of my favorite ones. Yeah. So the Google Doc link that I just shared a moment ago, that's this bookshelf here. On the bookshelf document, if you look on slide 2, the Shirokuma Cafe, this one is for a separate site that has not a ton of manga, but some fun manga, and it's got bilingual support on it. So I like that one a lot. The Matcha versus NHK News Web Easy. Oh, I like NHK News Web Easy. However, in the past couple of months, it has become difficult to use it because the current events items that are there are so depressing. Yeah. So matcha, again, matcha, the one that I was showing here, this one is more of a travel-based website. It will talk about seasonal foods, seasonal festivals, things like that. NHK News Web Easy has the advantage of being aimed at native speakers who are in middle school. So this website here, NHK News Web Easy, they rewrite current events news items for a middle school audience. You have the option within this of highlighting, color coding some of the vocabulary. So you see here, if you scroll down, if there's something green highlighted, hito no namae, orange highlighted, kuni ya ken, machi, basho nado no namae, de ao wa kaisha ya group nado no namae. Yes, and then these underlined terms they have a pop-up definition in Japanese. So this is really, really helpful in a lot of ways to explain through the language without resorting to English. So this is a really, really nice website in a lot of ways. And because it's current events, it can often take advantage of students' knowledge of world events. But in the past few months, unfortunately, it's like, well, do we want to talk about coronavirus? Or do we want to talk about coronavirus? Or do we want to talk about coronavirus? Or maybe the fact that we can't go to Japan? Do we want to talk about that? So in the past, I used this a lot, and I have to just kind of, it's been unfortunately such upsetting current events in a lot of cases that I've stepped away from it. So Mikiko Korn Sensei asked, how do I incorporate kanji practice into the lesson sequence? I have a hard time carving out time for students to practice kanji directly. Do you have a typical sequence? So every new unit of study, we're working on cultural context and vocabulary and grammar and kanji. And so it is tough to figure out where to fit things together. I do feel like the sequence of it shifts around for me sometimes. If I feel like the kanji will help the students with the grammar, I might even put it before new grammar, honestly. but it does tend, I do tend to work on culture together with grammar, followed or more by vocabulary and kanji as a way of pulling it all together. That's my most typical sequence. And this year, my school district has things so that students only have live lessons twice a week. So the sequence this year is quite challenging. We're not going nearly as fast as we ordinarily would be. And in terms of carving out time for when to practice kanji, if we're able to include some of these resources that are fun for them, if we can have reading content that is entertaining to them, if we can have those practice apps that they consider to be kind of like gamified, and that's a challenge that they enjoy for their own practice on their own time. Contents of the chat. Yes, I think the chat is something that's part of what is available after the webinar, but
I'm gonna ask Ben on this one. Hey, Ben.
He can check on that right now.
Yeah.
He just DM'd me on that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We'll get back to you on that one, Margaret.
Okay. What else? So that bookshelf that I showed you, I would love to have collaboration on adding to that. Okay, it does look like it's going to be saved, but Ben will also make sure to manually save that chat line. Okay. I would love to have collaboration on things like that bookshelf, because that, once I figured out how I wanted it to be organized, it didn't take an enormous amount of time to add new content to it, to this one, but I'm sure you've got better ideas than me about where to find some additional reading content. Yes. So I would love to have more here. And this is something where it gave me a way to reincorporate reading time for my students, because we're not being permitted to share books with our students. The process of disinfecting shared material is just a lot. So if I hand you one of these Tadoku books that's a short story that you would read in 10 minutes, then we have to disinfect between each user. And so it was not a manageable classroom activity. But this, with a digital, is a manageable classroom activity. So they can read things together, or they can read things as a homework task. All right. What else? Where did I find books that are in this collection? Okay. So there were several different sources for these. The tadoku.org people, they had on their website, if you go to the top of their website, they explain their philosophy and where this originated. This is something that they just have Tadoku reading groups in Japan for adult learners. Just show up and read what you are interested in reading. If it's too tough for you, put it down and go grab something else that's interesting to you. And so they've got that explanation here. But then they created some of their own materials. They rated existing materials. And now that this is a pretty established rating system for the complexity of of books. If you search Tadoku, Nihon Tadoku, Nihongo Tadoku, you can find a lot more resources for it than just this website. They also have a Twitter account. They have a Twitter account that's really just short, accessible paragraphs every day. That's nice stuff. So there's that as a resource. There was Japan Foundation Kansai is the source of some of these. Some of these was a result of me randomly searching on YouTube for books. The bilingual manga, these three, Cheese Sweet Home and Yotsubato and Shiroku and Cafe, those are all from bilingual manga. That was a suggestion from one of my students. These are kind of from all over the place, honestly. Yeah. Yes, so I'm going to put the Excel file. It's that's a Google Sheets file together in it. That's in a folder with some educational fonts, and I want to add some of the links here. I want to add this bookshelf file to the folder as well, and make it something we can collaborate on. And so that'll be something that you can receive the access to once we're finished today. What else did I want to mention? Anything else I wanted to mention? Oh, I don't think so. Okay, NHK News Web Easy. There are other NHK resources for learners. NHK News Web Easy is aimed at middle schoolers who are native speakers, but NHK also has resources for learners of Japanese that I want to add there to that file later. They've got other reading materials and listening materials as well. There's they have a weekly news summary audio report that they do every week. So there's that. And there are other children's newspapers too. It seems like there's like children's Yomiuri that's online, but I haven't used that in quite a while. I think that wraps up what I had thought of ahead of time to share with people. My intent really is to start conversations with this, not to present myself as having figured it out. So
we really appreciate it. That there's so many resources. It's amazing. Oh, Kelly Shiflett, have you seen the new Yoridori textbook where it's aimed at foreign residents? I've used some of the lessons for additional language input.
Yoridori, that's really interestingly thematic. And you're looking at this one, right? I had looked at this some, but I hadn't gotten into this as much as I would like. This one is really cool because it has more thematic information about seasonal celebrations and everyday life kind of stuff. So I really liked that aspect of this. I like that. I like using other Japan Foundation resources, like the Minna no Kyozai website is also really good for that type of things. Did they link that here? I feel like Japan Foundation resources tends to ooh, they didn't link that at the bottom of this. What?
Okay. If you go to Marugoto, I think there's all of the links there.
Yeah, Marugoto. Marugoto and the Marugoto no Kotoba websites link all of it together really nicely. And also the Minna no Kyozai is part of that same suite of information. If you come down to the bottom, it's Japan Foundation. Actually, let me just go over to Minna no Kyozai because that is kind of the parent for all of this. The Minna no Kyozai site, man, I created an account on this at least 15 years ago, and it has gotten better and better. The Minna no Kyozai site pulls together a lot of these educational resources, like these websites here that are Japan Foundation resources, plus it pulls together the can-do standards resources and other Japan Foundation research and materials, and it's just great, really good. This site, because Japan Foundation is a global organization. Oh, the last update was so good. Because this is a global organization, this much more than resources designed for an American audience has allowed me to find resources that show my students. I have a lot of students from Southeast Asian cultures. And this website, because it's got resources from Japan Foundation locations in Southeast Asia, I can find pictures that look like my kids. I can find cultural references that connect to things that they have talked about with me that aren't necessarily connected to American culture. And it's great. I really like this website. Anyway. Okay. I calmed down a little bit. No, I really like Minna no Kyozai. It's a good collaboration thing here too, because Minna no Hiroba and all that. It's good. All right. And Minna no Kyozai is also really good because some of the legacy materials that they have on here are things like picture cards that they used to publish and send out to classroom teachers, and they're no longer available in that format, but the pictures are still here. So that's good stuff. Yeah, this Kongetsu no pick up is always good stuff. All righty. Yeah, I need to stop looking at this because this is a website that I can spend the afternoon on if I don't watch it. Go down a trail there. Oh, someone's texting. Okay. So what else? What other resources? So like I said, I'm going to put a copy of the bookshelves into the folder that I'm sharing with you all later, and I'll make that something that we can all edit collaboratively. I'm putting in the spreadsheet with my analysis here as something that is not something you can edit this copy of, but you could make your own copy and then look at the analysis and decide how does that apply to my students' needs. And as I said, I will give you a template style copy of this Pear Deck presentation that is a format that I frequently use with my students when we're first looking at characters. So those things will be in that folder along with several fonts. And I think just to help me with organization, I will make a document that is useful links that we discussed today as well and put that in there. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we're coming up on time here, so that's perfect. Is there any other questions from anyone? Just go ahead and throw it in the chat. I think we got most of them as we were going, so that was perfect.
And Pear Deck. And without naming.
Patty Bruin Sensei.
You have a hard time typing radicals. Do I have any advice? One of the things that I've been able to do for that is no, that's not what I want. I just clicked on the wrong thing. One of the things that I tend to do with that is go into Jisho, and since these radicals in like how do I get the kusa kanmuri instead of getting the word kusa kanmuri? I do tend to put it into Jisho, and then you can highlight and copy and paste directly from here. And oddly enough, Wikipedia can be a good resource for this. Similarly, like I can't recall whether I did this for Wikipedia for this particular thing. Oh, you can see exactly what I've been doing with Wikipedia. We talked about how Raijin might eat your belly button if you don't hide it during a thunderstorm. We talked about that yesterday. The students thought I was lying. I was not lying. So if you go in Wikipedia, sometimes what you can do is you can paste that radical, and you can see there's a Wikipedia entry for just this radical. And it'll show it, and it is typically based on Chinese, but it'll also show different variations on it and a lot of stuff like that. If you go into, let's do Wikimedia instead. Wikimedia might often has pretty versions. Like Wiktionary showing all these variations. This is where, yeah, you can get this kind of visual to show students. So yeah, I would go into Jisho and enter it there because it breaks it apart well there. There are other resources for it, but that's the fastest for me.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, well, I think we are all set for today. So, Rebecca, do you have anything else to add?
I'm really excited to hear more from the attendees here about their ideas and how they would add to this because, like I said, a lot of this has been a long time of me playing with spreadsheets and crunching numbers and not really sure where I wanted to end up. So I wasn't really sure how to collaborate about it until about now.
Yeah.
I'm interested in collaborating more about it.
So, would there be a good way to get in touch with you for collaboration, like through your email, or do you prefer a different way for contact?
Okay, so I'm going to include my email, of course. We've got a Facebook group that is an OATJ Facebook group. And I'm going to stop sharing. We've got a Facebook group that is OATJ there. There's a separate Facebook group that we established that was AP Japanese teachers. Earlier this summer, we established that one, but I think OATJ might be a good way to do that if we want to have a bigger conversation rather than just me talking directly to an individual person.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, we can include links to our Facebook and yeah, and if anyone wants to get directly in contact with you for direct questions, we can include your email as well. Okay. Margaret Fitzgerald said, I need time off to check out these resources. Thank you very much. And Alexandria.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The OATJ, of course, other people could join the Facebook group. It's not that it's like, keep out. It's just that we're the ones who set it up. Oh, I'm glad it was helpful. Yeah. I always have this kind of imposter syndrome thing where I'm like, well, I'm sure that these other people have much better ideas. And so, okay. Yeah. Thank you to the Japan Foundation. I don't feel like I say enough about how fantastic their support and their research, and they're fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, methods course. Well, if I ever want to stop with the teaching of,
It's kind of what brought us to want to have you, Rebecca, is, we don't have enough, I feel, panels that talk about like, well, what can we do for Kanji curriculum? I feel like there's so much other information. So it's nice to finally have like oh my God, I never have a webinar about, disabled students or Kanji curriculum. So it's
I don't know if I mentioned this, my mom was a special ed teacher until she retired. And so when I was going through my master's program and being told, don't worry about it, you're not going to have these kids in your classes, I would call her and be like, Mom, I'm going to have these people in my classes, right? And she'd, oh, yes, you will. And let me tell you about the lawyer for the Association for Exceptional Children, I think, is an advocacy group. I think that's the name of it. And they make sure that their families know what their students' rights are. So you need to know what, it's like, fantastic. Okay. Yeah. And Tanaka sensei, that it's intimidating to figure out, if I'm looking at this long span of time and trying to plan backwards from the goal of, passing JLPT at this level or passing AP exams, it's such a mass of content to try to sequence and winnow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. I think I'm going to applause for everyone. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for all of your kind messages. Keep them coming.
I miss the group of sensei in California sometimes so much. They have such a fantastic collegial relationship throughout the state, and it's really inspiring to see when we go to ACTFL, when we see that group of teachers collaborating together. It's amazing.
Okay.